So, quiz time. There are two blanks on the screen. I found this quotation, I thought it was an interesting quotation. By the early, this is a decade, by the early given decade, a number of scientific leaders began to realize that this deluge of data was swamping the traditional publication and retrieval mechanisms, and that there was a danger that much of it would be lost to future generations. When several of these leaders got together and agreed that an organised international effort was needed to improve the management and preservation of scientific data and to facilitate coordination among interested groups throughout the world, something was the outcome. Two answers, please. Which decade?
1950. 1670s?
I don't hear it yet. I'll give you a clue. It could be 2010s. It could be, as we heard yesterday from Fran, Research Data Alliance was the outcome. It could even have been 2000s, and the Digital Curation Centre was the outcome. It's not. Any suggestions?
50s coded. No, 80s?
Not 50s.
70s?
Not 70s.
60s?
60s. By the early 1960s. So who said 60s? Okay. So there's a prize for you to come up and get. And who said co-data? I think okay. So here's a prize. Right. Okay. So and this is all in there. Co-data 45 years. The story of the ICSU Committee on Data Science and Technology. I thought that was an interesting quote because it shows, and this is really the theme of the talk, that a lot of these things, plus ça change, plus les choses restent les mêmes, as we say in Paris. So CoData was set up in the early 1960s by a group, and when I speak to the people involved in CoData, they talk to them as data zealots. And the early mission of CoData was very much to encourage, to coordinate, and provide guidance in activities and data compilation, and to understand where such activities were going on, what data was available for use, and to discuss issues of quality, availability, etc. And very much the sort of things that are being looked at the moment by the Research Data Alliance and by other organisations, and still, of course, by CoData. It was about international coordination, about bringing scientists together to look at these issues. So here are some of the early CoData publications. On the left there's the CoData International Compendium of Numerical Data Projects. The second one is the first CoData bulletin, which was to do with the task group on computer use for data management, which was in a relatively young discipline at the time. Guides to database management produced in the 80s and also in the 90s, data sources in Asian, oceanic countries. But there's very much this task of ascertaining what data is available for reuse and working on data availability and data quality. Early task groups that CoData then looked at materials data, looked at industrial data and data access. This is one of the founding fathers, as it were, of CoData, Frederick Rossini. And he had a vision of an array of world data centers of numerical data for science and technology, covering each area of science and appropriately tying in with the central office of CoData as a hub. I'll not read all the quotation, but I do find this intriguing. His idea was to have the central office process orders for data sets and direct the appropriate center to make the shipments, presumably on tape or even in punch cards at the time. That was the vision. It's good to have a high-reaching vision, but reality is different, and I think it's worth reflecting and thinking upon the reality and the limits of what is possible. So the reality was that CoData lacked the financial resources and the authority to set up and operate such an ambitious network. But what it did have was the ability to draw on volunteer efforts for scientists who were committed to the goal of preparing the most reliable data sets possible. Thus, it developed a program of action that facilitated the work of these scientists by providing a focal point for cooperative efforts and for information exchange, with the object of leveraging its limited financial and managerial resources to achieve maximum benefit. And I think that's one of the fundamental concepts. That's still true. CoData is an international organisation with considerable reach and considerable ambition. We're also a volunteer organisation. We rely on the involvement of people who believe in what we do and who want to contribute. But there are limits to what we can achieve, but we can achieve a great deal through not a great deal of money, through engaging with those enthusiasts. I wanted to talk a little bit also about one of the long-standing CoData task groups, which is the task group on fundamental physical constants. Now, the purpose of that group is periodically to revise the values for certain physical constants. So this is the sort of thing that they publish. There's the speed of light in a vacuum. What is the accepted experimentally proven value for the speed of light in a vacuum? The magnetic constants, the Planck constant, etc., etc. I'm not going to go through all of those. To be frank, I'm not sure that I understand entirely what all of these are. But this is fantastic, fundamental stuff. Periodically, this group reviews the latest experimental findings, perform a statistical mean squared process to find the most appropriate value, and every 4 years, roughly speaking, they revise some of these constants. And their next meeting, this is the other side of that card, and some of these cards are at the back of the room if you want to pick them up. I find this fascinating. And their next meeting is in November this year in Paris at the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, where they're going to be looking at a possible revision of the proton charge radius. So it's important stuff. I wanted to use that idea of the fundamental physical constants and the fundamental constants as a metaphor for the talk for these ongoing challenges in research data management internationally. The challenge that I've already mentioned of what can a small organisation with international reach and great ambitions do with a limited budget, but also what are the ongoing challenges which are facing all of us in improving research data management, improving the availability of research data, etc., the sort of thing that engages and inspires us to come to this conference. Fran talked yesterday about the research data ecosystem and the infrastructure ecosystem, and I think we're also developing now a collaboration ecosystem where there are a number of international organisations working in this space. People often ask me to draw a Venn diagram to show how CoData fits in with RDA and fits in with the World Data System. So there's the Venn diagram. I'm not going to flesh out these overlaps and say precisely, who does what where. RDA has the objective of building this international ecosystem for research data infrastructure, both human and technical. The ICSU World Data System is a sister organisation of CoData and is really an organisation of the World Data Centres. And CoData focuses largely on data science, data policy. We publish a data science journal. We run a conference every 2 years. But there's considerable overlap in our activities. And I think this is a work in progress as well. We're going to explore precisely how this overlap works and how we collaborate, how we cooperate, how occasionally we do pieces of work in parallel. But what I do want to talk about are these 4 areas which for the purpose of this talk, are the fundamental constants. That's the area where CoData hasn't got something necessarily exclusive to offer. We're not the only people that work in these areas, but we've got something distinctive. This is in our traditions. This is what we do. This is what we can leverage. So historically and still, we do a lot of work on the development and the implementation of research data policies. We work also at a national level with national committees and at an international level between those committees to encourage international cooperation and coordination. Because we're an organ of ICSU, the International Council of Science, we have as members a number of international scientific unions. And we have, in principle, very good links to representatives of particular scientific research areas. So we can leverage those links to tackle particular disciplinary challenges in research data, and ideally interdisciplinary challenges. And I'll give a couple of examples of those as I go through the talk. And finally, again, because we're a body of ICSU, we've got a specific mission to support international scientific research programs which are sponsored by ICSU, and I'll give examples of that as well. So, distinctive features of CoData. I mentioned that we're a body of ICSU. So ICSU is the International Council of Science, a representative body for scientists internationally. And ICSU has the mission of strengthening international science for the benefit of society. CoData adds the data angle by promoting improved scientific data and technical data management and use. So the first of those themes that I'll talk about are data policies. Now, as I said, this is an area that we've worked in for some time. You'll be aware, I'm sure, of the considerable influence that the OECD principles and guidelines for access to research data from public funding have. They were developed, the first iteration, I think, in 2004, 2005, the recommendations, then developed into a set of principles. The work on those principles was done in a workshop which was held in Paris in February 2004, which was, to which CoData and a group of people from CoData contributed a great deal. So we had a considerable influence in the development of those policies. And those policies in turn have had a great influence, for example, on the the Research Council UK principles of access to public data. So that's the sort of, a model for the way in which CoData works. We work in partnership with other international organizations, we convene, we work in workshops, and we help develop data policies in that way. Another long-standing commitment that we've had is with GEO, with the group of on Earth observations. Now this is an international organization, an intergovernmental organization, based in Switzerland, which really promotes access to Earth observation data of various sorts, whether that's from satellites, whether that's from in-situ sensors, whether it's from airborne sensors. It's a very considerable and very important international activity. In 2005, I think they developed a set of data sharing principles, again with considerable input from CoData experts. And then in 2006, CoData was asked to lead the data sharing working group for the group on Earth observations. So the principles were developed. There's a link there to a blog post I wrote, or sorry, not I wrote, that Rob Chen wrote about the history of the engagement with the SWG, which might be of interest. We led that group from 2006 as one of the co-chairs, and CoData people were heavily involved in the development of this white paper, which is really a pretty comprehensive discussion of the challenges and the case for the implementation of these data sharing principles. The first iteration of that white paper was 2007, and then this version is available in the Data Science Journal from 2009. And it's a very nice overview, I think, of the issues and worth reading. This was very influential within GEO, and as GEO has developed, and as the system of systems for sharing data which GEO developed has been put in place, the work of the data sharing working group, I think it's been recognised as being very fundamental and very important within that activity. And now hundreds and thousands of data sets which are accessible through the GEO system of systems. So, as I said, CoData's played a leadership role in the policy building and building the consensus within GEO around data sharing since 2005, and developed an influence, a considerable influence in development of the policies and the plans for implementation. One of the GEO role is important because it's one of the areas of data sharing where the benefits of data sharing can be most clearly demonstrated. You're possibly aware of the issue with US Landsat data, which until 2008, the US government, or at least the layers of the Landsat data, charged for access to that data. So at the year in which undercharging Landsat data was being used, purchased, downloaded the most, there were roughly 50 images a day being downloaded from US Landsat. Since they stopped charging, the use of US Landsat data has increased incredibly, and there are now 5,700 scenes a day being downloaded. And that's an absolutely vast increase in the use of those data. The Executive Secretary of GEO, Barb Ryan, gave a TED talk in Barcelona recently, where she gave the figures for a piece of research which was conducted in Spain on forestation, or rather deforestation, which is, the research relied on land coverage data from satellites, using Landsat data. And the cost of that study, under the charging system, would have been $260 million. Which, yeah, absolutely. That's what I thought. Whereas without charging, it's free and the research can be done. So I think this is a fundamental key area for us to demonstrate the benefits of data sharing, and it's an area in which Codate has had a considerable influence. I want to talk also about the data citation work, which is an area I think which has also been an important contribution. This is one of our task groups, or a Codata ICSI task group. I think two of the co-chairs are in the room, Christine Borman and Sarah Callahan. This group's existed since 2010. A couple of years ago, I think with the support of Birdie, the Board on Research Data and Information, they organised a large workshop not far from here in Berkeley, of which the report for attribution was the output. And then developed the report Out of Sight, Out of Mind, which was released again on the Codata Data Science Journal in September. These are the principles which were developed in that report. I'm not going to go into the detail, but really what I want to talk about is some of the collaboration which has gone on around the data citation principles work, which I think is interesting, and I think is a very important model for international collaboration between the sort of groups that I've mentioned. So around March, April last year, the Codata report was being circulated in draft. In late March, there were two conferences happening more or less at the same time. There was the Research Data Alliance plenary, where people were talking about data citation, and data citation working group was being set up. And also at the same time in Amsterdam, there was the Force 11 conference, Beyond the PDF 2, where a group of people got together and produced the Amsterdam Manifesto on data citation. Force 11 then instituted a working group to take forward the work of the Amsterdam Manifesto and to extend that. And then in the summer this year, calls came in from various parties, and particularly from Paul Voulier, who has been very much involved with Codata work, for these various groups to collaborate. And that set off really this data citation synthesis group, a collaboration between various people, various individuals and various groups, which worked over the summer with the curation of Force 11 running the teleconferences, with Codata convening the workshop between the Research Data Alliance meeting and the DataCite meeting in DC. And they've produced, that group, through that process of collaboration, which I think is extremely laudable and valuable, they've produced this joint declaration of data citation principles, which is now being finalized, and there's a workshop on this tomorrow. Two examples here of implementing data citation and the push for that by particular data centers. But of course, data citation principles aren't enough. It's a matter of moving from principles to practice. I like this poster from the Australian National Data Service of building a culture of data citation. The idea being that if you incorporate data within a scholarly record, just as you, by referencing it, just as you reference scholarly articles, etc. You create a process of use, of reward, of recognition for people who use it. We're a long way from achieving that, and principles are all very well, but turning those principles into practice is extremely important. And I think perhaps a neglected part of the Codata report is the 7th chapter, which is really a research agenda for the sort of activities which need to be promoted in order to turn the principles of data citation, which we've been working on, into practice. And they might include various elements. The way that the citation of data might precipitate other changes, related changes in the scholarly infrastructure, micro-attribution, for example, or nano-publications. The specific things which are necessary for an infrastructure of data citation, for example, versioning, provenance tracking, the digital fingerprint of a data set. So that's explored also in that Codata report. And it also stresses the value of data citation within the scholarly infrastructure for evaluation, for understanding better research. That if people reference their sources and reference the data sources, we can understand better how the research process is working as well. I think that's also an important message from that report. Next steps, I've talked about data citation from principles to practice. Really, to get traction for moving from principles to practice, as I say, we need to go out to the influencers, the people that make decisions about these things. And really that means publishers, it means journal editorial boards, and it means groups of scientists. And as I say, because of Codata's links with international scientific unions, we think we have a strong role to play there. There'll be a Birds of the Feather group on a broad data citation interest group at the next RDA meeting, which may be of interest. Trish Cruz has talked about a campaign for data citation practice and to implement that, and that's something which we think Codata with other partners can be part of. And as I say, we want to make the case for data citation with various communities. John mentioned that I'm involved in the DRIVE initiative, and Tom Vision wouldn't forgive me and would probably shake his moustache at me if I didn't mention DRIVE's been very involved in promoting data citation and the availability of research data sets associated with scholarly articles. And the next DRIVE community meeting is going to be the 28th of May at the SSP in Boston, so good time for that. Other areas that Codata is working on policy issues. This is one of the principal planks of our strategic plan, which is to set up an international data policy committee. We've done lots of work, as I've indicated, through task groups, through particular collaborations on data policy, the development and implementation of data policy. But we think it's time to take a little bit more of an international leadership and coordinating role, and we think that Codata is in a position to be able to do that, and to do things a little bit more strategically. So we're currently putting together, as I say, an international data policy committee, which will be genuinely international, will be drawn from many of the Codata members and beyond. And really we intend that group to have an advisory role, an agenda setting role, and to be something that can benefit Codata national members through providing a liaison point, a touch point, a point for collaboration around research data policy issues. So I don't think any presentation would be complete without the Golden Gate Bridge serving as a metaphor for collaboration between various countries. However, that's bilateral, and Codata's bigger than that. So this is a network map of the Paris Metro, really designed as a metaphor for the network effect that can be achieved through intranational, within the nation, and international cooperation through an organisation like Codata. The Codata offices are up here on the left near 12. So Codata is a global organisation. The principal category of membership is national. Particular organisations join on behalf of a particular country. But we encourage them to set up a national committee which acts as a stakeholder group. And where that works very strongly, that can be a powerful tool. So those are the national members at this point in time. Like RDA, I mean, we've been around for some time and we have genuinely international reach. But we also have a mission to increase our reach in Africa, in Latin America. We have very, very strong engagement with the Academies of Sciences in India, who are hosting the next conference, in China and Japan, and other countries in the Far East. But like every organisation, we certainly need to expand. So Codata National Committees, this is the network effect that I hope we can achieve through these. What are the benefits of national committees and what sort of role can they play? In an ideal world, and I think this happens in certain countries, the national committee can be a stakeholder group that brings together various organisations and various stakeholders within their countries. They can provide a forum for discussion and the elevation of research data issues. And it can also be a medium through which a given country collaborates and exchanges with other countries. In the United States, where the Codata Committee is very much involved with the Board of Research Data and Information, and in China, where they have a very strong Codata Committee, this has been particularly prominently the case. So there have been a number of bilateral activities between US Codata and Codata China. Here's an example from 2006, I think, yes, 2006, where a workshop was held on strategies and preservation. Strategies for preservation and open access to scientific data in and from China. And that's an example of the sort of work that Codata committees can do in bilateral collaboration. And that's the sort of thing that we would like to promote. The Codata China Committee is particularly active, and this week has been organising a national conference on research data and big data in China. And the outputs of that conference will appear in the Codata Data Science Journal. So I'm going to move on to talk about Codata task groups. We've got two models for groups working on particular issues. Working groups which are strategic and directed by the executive committee or by the secretariat to take advantage of particular issues, to seize particular opportunities. And task groups which are really selected by the Codata membership at the General Assembly. That's a list of the current task groups. We encourage task groups to engage with the strategic plan to address the sort of issues with which Codata is concerned, and to bring together various stakeholders, particularly to encourage the involvement of international scientific unions or representatives of particular research areas. I'll briefly run through some examples of the task groups. There's a task group on advancing informatics for microbiology, which has been holding workshops recently in China, really looking at interoperability issues and looking at training issues in various aspects of informatics for microbiology. What's significant about this task group is the involvement of two international unions for microbiology science and biological science, and the involvement of the World Data Center on microorganisms. There's a group also looking at linked open data for global disaster data, linking various data sets which are of relevance for the prediction, for response to, and for risk calculation, and for the damage calculation, why I can't remember the term for that, but understanding the cost of particular disasters. And again, I mentioned that one partly because of the technology involved, which I think is of interest, partly because of the approach, which is the integration of various data sets, but also because of this task group's engagement with an ICSU program. ICSU sponsor a program called the Integrated Research on Disaster Risk, for which the program office is based in Beijing, and this group works very closely with that international program. There's also a task group on data at risk, which is looking at the preservation and the digitization of various data sets of use to science, and particularly to climate change science, which are in an analog format and would benefit from digitization and from greater availability. And again, that task group has been working with the UNESCO Memory of the World initiative. They organised a workshop at that conference in September last year in Vancouver, and they've organised various workshops at various conferences internationally. And then finally, an example of the Global Roads Task Group, which is looking at various methods for extracting information from satellite imagery and from other sources to provide mapping of roads internationally, particularly in Africa. And they've produced a review of global roads data development methodologies. That brings me on to the work of another task group. There are various activities that CoData has been involved with for data and development. We've got a long-standing task group called Preservation and Access to Scientific Data for developing countries. They've been in existence for 10 years or so, and they've organised a whole series of workshops in various countries. The next one is in Kenya this summer, jointly organised with World Federation of Engineering, with UNESCO, and with the Ministry of Communication and Information in Kenya. Their workshops often have a two-day training component, and then a main workshop to address data availability and preservation access issues in developing countries. And their particular objective in this workshop will be to develop and endorse a set of principles and guidelines for preservation and open access in developing countries. I said we work on the one hand through task groups, on the other hand through working groups, and I want to talk about the work that we've done with nanomaterials as an example of the way that CoData can work effectively in particular research areas. So we currently have a working group on the description of nanomaterials. This had its origins a couple of years ago in 2012 when CoData with ICSU convened a workshop involving international stakeholders, involving representatives from various international scientific unions, from standards bodies, involving data experts. We brought those together to discuss the need and the approach to developing a uniform description model for nanomaterials. That then formed a working group with some funding from ICSU, which has been holding a series of workshops and produced a draft framework for the description of nanomaterials. And then that work has been taken up within an FP7 funded project, Future Nanoneeds, to be further validated, tested, and further developed. And I just want to stress this. I think this is a modus operandi for the way that CoData can play this convening role with international scientific unions, bringing together essentially data experts on the one hand, representatives of scientific bodies, research scientists, and standards bodies, to work on a particular data opportunity or challenge in a research area, to develop a set of principles or guidelines or norms or standards, and then to take that out, perhaps through external funding. So that's a modus operandi which I think we can explore. I think the nanomaterials project is a good model for how we work in that area. So the last of those four fundamental areas of our activity is support for international scientific programs. So I don't know how many people in this room are aware of the Future Earth initiative, which is sponsored by ICSU, by ISSC, which is the International Council for Social Science. It's also sponsored by the Belmont Forum, which is a coordinating body for research funders, really designed to align research funding towards particular research activities. So Future Earth, as it says, is an attempt to meet calls for international coordinated research on global development and sustainability issues. It's been launched in the last year or so, as I say, sponsored by ICSU. The activities in which they're involved are very much to encourage interdisciplinary research in global change and development science, and particularly the impact of environmental change on people, on cities, on economies. And so it's bringing together social science and economic research, with environmental change research, with earth system science research, using a wide variety of data sets, including Earth observation, including meteorology, etc. And very much a buzzword at the moment, they want to strengthen the partnerships between the research scientists involved, between the funders, and between the potential users of the science. This is really driving at science for impact, science for policy. Science as a way of guiding policy on our response to global change and development issues. So it aligns very much with the ICSU mission in that way. In order to do that, that requires the integration of both practice, encouraging interdisciplinary research, and the integration of diverse data sets from diverse sources. As I've said, from social science, from Earth observation, from global change, from Earth system science. And so a lot of the pilot projects which are being developed are looking at integrative approaches to research in various ways. And there are clearly significant data challenges there as well. There's the availability and the access to particular data sets, and there's the challenge of integration of these data sets, and what information can be extracted from those data for what purposes. Sort of a bit slogany, but this is sort of the objective of this sort of program, and the data and information policy and approach within that sort of program, providing the right data and information in the right form at the right time to the right people to make the right decisions. This is the sort of mission of Future Earth and similar programs, and the importance of the data aspect of such activities. So CoData with WDS has been involved in an advisory role to that project, and in pushing the data agenda within that program. We prepared a set of data principles. I'm not going into the details of those, but we felt they were quite nicely crafted and quite useful. And we also included in our recommendations document the recommendation to use the DCC's DMP online for the projects within the program. Those recommendations have not yet been accepted. Indeed, there's even some resistance from the Future Earth program about adopting these principles, which they felt were a little bit too prescriptive. And I think that's illustrative of the ongoing discussion that we need to have with practitioners, with research scientists about the benefits of such data principles. The Future Earth team said to us, well, really what we're concerned about, how do we get our hands on the data that we need to do the research? It's the data availability that we need. That needs to be tackled, but the downstream, what happens to the data products, to the analysed data, also, we think, needs to be addressed. I mentioned briefly earlier the integrated research on disaster risk. I'll skip over this slide a little bit because of time, but this is another ICSU-sponsored program in research on response to disasters, and the use of data to understand, to predict, to understand responses to, and to understand the cost of disaster, with which we're engaged. And as part of our support, both for Future Earth and for integrated research on disaster risk, we're organising a big data workshop in Beijing in June. The date hasn't yet been decided. It's either going to be before or after the IRDR conference. But we hope to contribute to some of their work by convening international experts on big data to discuss how programs like Future Earth and integrated research on disaster risk can use big data approaches to extract information from the various data sets which we're using. The other thing, of course, that I have to mention is the CoData conference. This edition is being co-organised with our sister organisation, the World Data System, and will take place in New Delhi in November. We're putting together, as we speak, I've got a call at 5 AM tomorrow morning to finalise the International Scientific Programme Committee. But these will be the high-level themes, and the call for abstracts will be released in early March. The broad theme of the conference is data sharing and integration for global sustainability, and you can see again there we're contributing to the themes of these ICSU programs. Those will be the sub-themes, and I hope those speak to the people in this room, and I hope we'll have abstracts and proposals for workshops and activity around this conference. We very much intend to work with other partners on this conference, with Research Data Alliance, with other partners, and we hope that it can be very much a milestone international conference on research data issues. It's in India. We hope that it'll attract a genuinely international audience, and we hope we can help thereby address some of the issues which are of importance for scientists in India and elsewhere to address the sort of global issues which are of importance for the programs that I've described. So to close, I mentioned these 4 themes. These are areas in which we think Codata has a, not unique, but a distinctive mission for activity. Some areas in which we have contributed and we can carry on contributing because of our membership model, because of the organisations with which we work. But it's also an opportunity, please, to collaborate with Codata, to collaborate between international organisations that we've mentioned, between RDA, WDS and Codata, and as individuals. We're taking forward work, as I've said, on data policy, encouraging collaboration between national committees. I don't know whether you're aware of the national committees, the Codata committees in your countries. Get involved. We're trying to pursue this modus operandi that I mentioned of building bridges between data experts and specialist researchers to tackle data challenges, and supporting those international programs. And I hope in discussing those I've given a flavour of the importance and the significance of that sort of work, how it can bring real value through research data, and have a real impact on policy decisions. One way of getting involved is to be part of a proposal for a Codata task group. There's a bit.ly link there, and as I've mentioned, there's 3 significant events coming up this year. The workshop, the Big Data workshop in Beijing, about which details will be distributed shortly. There's the workshop on data for developing countries in Kenya this summer, and of course there's the SciDataCon, the International Data Conference in New Delhi in November. And that's me. Thanks very much for your attention. Thanks.
We have time for 2 questions. Where are you? I have one question. Given the global nature of this, do you ever find yourself in the middle of political disputes regarding competing national interests and interdisciplinary interests about security, sensitivity of data, development interests versus environmental interests, that kind of thing?
So, sensitivity about data is an issue, particularly with Earth observation data and satellite data. Some of it is restricted for national security reasons. And that has been an ongoing area of discussion in the data policy working group, working with you with the group on Earth observation. And I think those sort of issues were discussed in the sort of workshop that I mentioned between the US Codata Committee and the China Codata Committee. There are other issues as well. So in the nanomaterials project, we have a data expert from the States who was John Rumble, who was very much involved in the development of that uniform information model, and was therefore involved in this, with the Codata, through Codata, involved in Future Nanonews, the FP7 funded project. And at the workshop, they're talking about the things that are important for the FP7 funding program in Europe, which are European research competitiveness, and turning the findings of research and science into products. And he's sitting there as an American saying, well, hey, these are our competitors. I mean, these things occur. Nevertheless, I think we show through the Landsat example, for example, that I gave, that data sharing benefits everyone and should be followed.
One more question. Does the microphone come in, please? Wait.
Thanks. Has there been any discussion about crowdfunding to fund some of these initiatives?
Do you mean sort of specifically related task groups or initiatives in general?
In general.
In general. So, yeah, good question. In terms of task groups, just to deal with that quickly, we give a small amount of seed funding for task groups for meetings, and we expect them to go out and look for other funding, and seed funding, crowdfunding would be a possibility. For the sort of international research programs that I've spoken about, I'm not sure that has been considered, and arguably it's something that might be of value. I certainly know that Future Earth will receive funding, coordinated funding through the Belmont Forum, international attempt to align research funding for particular research areas. Where there are activities, and I know that they want to use crowdsourced data for various projects, where those activities have specific benefits for specific groups, then why not? But I think there's a lot of issues to be okay with as well.